Rain tapped softly against the thatched rooftops of Whisperwood Village, each droplet like a tiny drumbeat in the hush of evening. A low mist curled around the crooked chimneys, curling like sleepy cats around the window panes, wrapping the little town in a blanket of fog. The villagers had all gone inside, their lanterns glowing like golden eyes behind curtains. But at the very edge of the forest, where the trees twisted like giant vines and the earth smelled of old moss and secrets, something stirred. An owl glided silently between the branches, its wings whispering through the air. Below, a path of mushrooms glowed faintly blue, leading deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser there, their roots thick and tangled, and at the heart of it all stood a house like no other. It was shaped like a teapot turned on its side, with a chimney that puffed lavender smoke and windows that blinked like sleepy eyes. Vines crept up its walls, blooming with silver flowers that opened only at night. Inside the house, a pot bubbled on the stove. The steam rose in curls, and with every curl, the wind outside seemed to sigh. A figure moved through the room, tall, hunched, wrapped in layers of green and purple cloth. Her hands, long and knobby, stirred the bubbling mixture with a spoon carved from moonwood. Her eyes were bright as fireflies, and her nose bent like a willow branch. She wasn't just any old woman. She was the Witch of Wishing Wood. No one had seen her in years. Some said she'd turned into mist. Others whispered that she'd flown away on a moth's back. But here she was, brewing something old and powerful, something that shimmered with the glow of starlight and the hush of dreams. As the clock struck midnight, she lifted the spoon, tasted the mixture, and smiled. Far away, in the sleeping village, 3 hearts began to stir, each holding a wish, though they did not yet know it. Long before sunrise, as the mist still clung low to the cobblestone streets, a quiet rustle woke a boy named Elliot. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, the sound of wind brushing past his window like a voice just beyond hearing. Elliot was small for his age, with hair the color of ash bark and eyes wide as a morning sky. He had always felt a pull toward the forest, though his parents warned him never to go past the edge. The woods were old, they said, and filled with things better left undisturbed. But something about that morning was different. The air felt heavy with a secret, like the world was holding its breath. Meanwhile, in a cottage near the orchard, a girl named Mabel brushed her hair and listened closely to the stillness. She was thoughtful and quiet, with freckles scattered across her nose like pollen on petals. Her brother had been sick for weeks, and no herbs or soups had helped. Mabel wished, more than anything, that she could fix it. She whispered that wish into her pillow each night, and though no one heard, the wind sometimes paused outside her window as if it were listening. Elsewhere, an old man named Tom wandered the edges of town just after dawn, his cane tapping softly on the ground. He was known for his forgetfulness, but no one remembered that he had once been a traveler, sailing rivers and chasing stories. Now he lived alone, with only a cracked globe and a faded map for company. Tom wished for just one last great adventure, though he no longer said so aloud. As morning brightened and birds began to call, none of them knew their wishes had already taken root. Back in the wishing wood, the witch stirred her cauldron again. From the rafters hung bundles of dried thyme, starlace, and foxmint. Jars lined the shelves, their labels hand-scrawled in curling letters. Memory dust, petal whispers, truth, pebbles. She plucked 3 vials from a velvet-lined drawer, each filled with a drop of shimmering light. With careful hands, she dropped them one by one into the potion. The brew hissed, then sighed, as if it had waited a long time. Then, with a single word, ancient and soft, the witch sent the magic drifting into the wind. That same afternoon, Elliot wandered beyond the garden fence. A butterfly with wings like stained glass had fluttered past, and he followed it without thinking. The trees seemed to part gently for him, the branches whispering above. He paused when he saw something strange. A glowing blue mushroom nestled between roots, the same kind from the legends. Elliot blinked. Another one glowed a little further along. Like stepping stones, they led him deeper, and though he knew he should turn back, curiosity tugged at his feet like a gentle tide. Mabel, too, felt the change. As she walked to the well to fetch water, a silver feather drifted down before her. She reached out, catching it in her palm. It shimmered and vanished. Where it had landed, The grass beneath her toes began to glow faintly, leading a winding trail toward the woods. Her heart beat faster. Her brother had coughed all night. Maybe this was something. Maybe it was hope. Old Tom, sitting by the fire with a mug of warm milk, heard the soft sound of chimes. But there were no chimes in his home. He stood slowly, listening. The sound came from his dusty satchel, the one he hadn't opened in years. He unbuckled it and found a compass, long forgotten. Its needle spun once, then pointed not north, but east, toward the wishing wood. He chuckled, shaking his head. Nonsense, surely! But his feet began to move before he could argue. By late afternoon, the three of them, boy, girl, and elder, stood at different edges of the forest, each following signs they could not explain. The woods welcomed them like an old friend, soft moss beneath their feet, sunlight dappling through the leaves in golden patches. Elliot was the first to find the teapot-shaped house. He gasped, hiding behind a fern. It was smaller than he expected, yet grand in a peculiar way. Flowers glowed around the windows. The door creaked open as if expecting him, and a curious warmth floated out. Mabel arrived moments later, stepping quietly through the trees. She paused beside Elliot, her eyes wide. Neither spoke, but their hearts thudded with wonder and caution. Tom came last, his cane tapping softly. He smiled when he saw the house, as though recognizing it from an old dream. The door opened further, creaking gently, and though no one stood there, a hush fell over the clearing. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and rain. Jars sparkled on the shelves, books lined every corner, and the fireplace glowed with lavender flames. The witch sat at a small table, sipping tea from a cup shaped like a lily. Her eyes glinted, not with mischief, but with knowing. She beckoned them in, though she did not speak. One by one, they stepped inside. She gestured toward the fire, and they sat, unsure. Then the room changed. Elliot saw a swirl of smoke become his father's face. Tired and kind, but always working, always too busy to listen. Mabel saw her brother sleeping, pale and still, the covers rising only slightly with each breath. Tom saw a boat on a river, stars above, a journey unfinished. The witch stood and placed 3 small vials on the table. Each shimmered softly, the colors of moonlight, dawn, and deep forest green. Without words, they understood. A wish was a powerful thing, but it came not from the bottle, it came from the heart that carried it. Elliot reached for the moonlight vial. He thought of how often he wished his father would truly see him, not just as a boy with chores and school books, but as someone with thoughts and dreams and questions. He wished for a way to show who he really was. Mabel took the vial of dawn. She held it to her chest, and a warmth spread through her. She wished not only for her brother to heal, but for her fear to become something stronger, something like courage. Tom chose the forest green vial. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't wish for youth or strength. He wished for a path, a new one, even if it led to the unknown. The witch nodded once. The room shimmered. In a blink, they were back in their own places, Elliot near the garden fence, Mabel at the well, Tom by his fire. The forest was still. The house was gone. But the vials remained in their hands. Cool, real. And so the wishes began to work, not with flashes or bangs, but with quiet moments and small changes. Elliot's father came home early that evening. For the first time in weeks, he sat with his son and listened. Really listened. Elliot spoke of the butterfly, the glowing mushrooms, the trees. His father looked at him, amazed, and said he had once seen those very same mushrooms as a boy. They talked until the stars came out. Mabel returned to her brother's side. She placed the vial under his pillow, her heart full of hope. That night, for the first time in many days, he slept without coughing. The next morning, color returned to his cheeks. And Mabel, she felt a new steadiness inside her, like the roots of an oak. She sat beside her brother and read him stories, her voice clear and calm. Tom, holding his compass and vial, looked at the map above his fireplace. The line he had once drawn years ago, the one that led to the place marked, "Here be wonders," seemed to glow. He packed a satchel with a blanket, a notebook, and a sandwich. He stepped outside and followed the compass, his cane tapping in rhythm with his steps. Past the village edge, past the orchard, into the soft whispering of trees. None of them saw the witch again. But sometimes, when the wind passed through the trees just so, or a feather landed where no bird had flown, or a mushroom glowed faintly blue beneath the roots, they felt her presence. The Witch of Wishing Wood had given them no promises, only a chance, and in their hands, the magic began to grow. Even as the days warmed and the air turned sweeter with the promise of spring, the magic each had been given did not unfold all at once. It moved like ivy, slow and quiet, reaching places no one expected. But all magic, no matter how gentle, brings a test. For Elliot, Mabel, and Tom, the test was coming. It began on a cloudy afternoon, when the sky felt too low and the wind moved like it had lost its way. Elliot stood by the stream behind his house, holding a wooden carving of a bird he had made. His father had promised to help him paint it that day. But hours passed, and still no one came. Elliot's excitement turned to something else familiar. Sharp disappointment. He sat down by the water, his fists tight. The vial he'd kept safely hidden in his coat pocket seemed to pulse softly, as if it could feel his storm. His heart pounded. Maybe the wish hadn't really worked. Maybe nothing had changed at all. Just as Elliot threw a pebble into the stream, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow moved between the trees, swift, too fast to be a deer. Elliot stood, listening. The leaves rustled, but there was no wind. A breathless feeling filled the woods. Something was watching. Far across the village, Mabel held her brother's hand, humming softly. He had gotten better, yes, much better, but that morning, he'd shivered again. Her fear returned like a cold fog. What if the magic wasn't enough? What if she had hoped too hard? She stepped outside, gripping the now empty vial. She had poured every drop into his tea days ago. The glass caught a sudden beam of sunlight, and then it cracked. A thin line down the middle. Mabel blinked, startled. Then the wind picked up, tugging at her braid. A voice seemed to echo no words, just the feeling of being called. She followed it. At the edge of the woods, she found Elliot, pale and trembling, staring into the trees. Before either could speak, the ground trembled slightly. Birds scattered. And from between the trees came a figure, tall, hunched, wrapped in a cloak of bark and shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly green, but not like the witch's. These were colder, older. It stepped forward, and with each movement, the grass wilted beneath its feet. Elliot felt the vial in his pocket grow hot. The figure spoke not with words, but with a weight of thought pressing into their minds. It was the echo thing, the old doubt, the whisper that hides beneath every wish. It had waited in the woods for years, feeding on broken hopes, on magic that was made but never trusted. Now it had awoken. It turned its gaze to Elliot, and the boy stepped back. He remembered the look in his father's eyes just yesterday, how they had sparkled with pride. But the memory faded beneath the weight of his fear. He hadn't believed it would last. He hadn't trusted it enough. And the echo thing grew stronger. Mabel reached for Elliot's hand, squeezing hard. She felt it too, that gnawing voice in her chest, saying it was foolish to hope that she'd lose her brother after all. She shook her head, tears welling. The magic hadn't failed, but doubt had crept in, and that's what this creature fed on. The trees groaned above them. The sky darkened, even though it was barely noon. Then, from deeper in the forest, came a steady sound, tap, tap, tap. Tom. He appeared between the trees, his cane striking the ground with quiet certainty. He looked thinner, perhaps more tired, but his eyes burned bright. The compass swung from his neck, and the vial of forest green hung at his side, now glowing softly. He did not flinch at the sight of the echo thing. He had faced many doubts in his life, fears of being too old, of being forgotten, of having no more use. But he had walked into the forest anyway. He had followed a map no one believed in, trusted a compass that no longer pointed north. And in doing so, he had found something stronger than the shadow in front of him. He stepped between the children and the creature. Slowly, he lifted the compass. The needle spun once, then it stopped, right at the echo thing. The creature hissed, not with sound, but with a twisting of the air. Tom stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, not angry, not loud. He spoke of choice, of how wishes must be held with courage, not just made, of how magic only blooms when tended with trust. Elliot's heart pounded. He remembered the way his father had leaned in to listen, truly listen, for the first time. That moment had been real. He held it close, like a shield. Mabel thought of her brother, laughing softly over his morning porridge. Not coughing, not pale, she believed in it, truly. The air around them shimmered. Elliot reached into his pocket and pulled out the moonlight vial. Though it had already been opened, a faint glow remained. He held it forward. Mabel lifted her broken vial, its crack now shining like a lightning bolt. And Tom, steady as a stone, raised his own. The light from the vials rose like mist, then formed into 3 shapes: an owl, a fox, and a moth, each glowing with a soft, warm hue. They circled the creature, weaving through the trees, their wings humming a song too old for words. The echo thing shrank back, not because it had been defeated, but because it had been seen, named, and refused. It vanished, not with thunder, but with a breath like fog and morning sun. The forest stilled, the air cleared, and the vials, now empty, floated gently from their hands and disappeared into the sky like dandelion seeds. The witch never appeared, but on the bark of a nearby tree, 3 shapes had been carved: a feather, a flame, and a leaf. Tom turned to the children, his smile warm. There would always be shadows, always be doubts. But so long as they remembered who they were and what they chose to believe, no shadow could stay for long. The 3 of them walked home through the quiet woods, sunlight spilling through the trees like gold ribbon. And behind them, where their feet had touched the earth, tiny mushrooms began to glow. They had faced the test not with spells, but with trust. And that, in the end, was the strongest magic of all. Whisperwood Village never knew what had stirred in the forest that week. The people went on with their days, planting seeds, mending roofs, and sweeping doorsteps, never guessing that something very old had come and gone, just beyond the tree line. But Elliot, Mabel, and Tom carried its memory like a small ember, quiet, glowing, and deeply warm. In the days that followed, Elliot no longer waited for his father with quiet hope. He asked to walk beside him, to help with his tools, to show him how he carved tiny birds from wood. And his father, perhaps changed in his own quiet way, began to set aside time each evening. Sometimes they painted, sometimes they just sat, watching the sky turn purple. Elliot had no more glowing vials, no more forest magic. But he had something stronger. He believed in being seen and in making himself known. Mabel's brother grew stronger with each passing day. His laugh returned like the morning sun, tentative at first, then full and bright. But the real change bloomed within Mabel. The fear she had once felt didn't vanish. It softened, like a shell cracked open to reveal something steady underneath. She no longer whispered her hopes to pillows. She spoke them aloud, even when they trembled. She learned that caring deeply was not weakness. It was courage. Tom, with his cane and his satchel, did not return to the quiet corners of his cottage. He visited the schoolhouse, telling stories that made children's eyes widen. He shared tales of rivers that ran backward and stars that hummed when you listened. Some laughed and called him odd, but the ones who listened closely, who felt the pull of wonder, found in Tom a friend who had not forgotten how to dream. Spring arrived in full. Flowers burst like laughter from the earth, and the forest rustled with secret life. Sometimes, Elliot would find a feather caught on his windowsill, or Mabel would spot a silver moth flitting past the garden. Tom, when walking the orchard paths at dusk, would see a faint blue glow beneath the roots. They never spoke of the witch aloud, but deep in the wishing wood, the house shaped like a teapot still stood, flowers still opened at dusk. And the witch, quiet as shadow and bright as starlight, continued her work. She never asked for thanks, because she knew the truth. A wish is not a fix, it is a seed, and only those who carry it with courage, who tend it through fear and doubt, can see it bloom. And so, the wind carried her magic onward, to the next whispered dream, to the next brave heart, to the next wish, waiting to be believed.